So I woke up this morning to the news that Ableton have released in public beta Ableton Live 12.2, which comes with a huge number of additions, features, improvements, etc. And in this video, I just want to go through the release notes for this first public beta, which is 12.2b9, and just show you everything that is new in the upcoming, what will be upcoming release of Ableton Live 12.2. If you want to skip through and check out the features, there'll be a timestamp in the description that you can check out. This is not going to be a video going in depth on all these new features. This is just going to be kind of my first reactions to each of the new additions shown in the release notes. So without any further ado, let's jump into the release notes and take a look at what is new. So right off the bat, we have some updates to auto filter. I'm super stoked for this. We can see it's got a redesigned kind of UI, both in terms of, well, UI and sound, which is pretty cool. Emphasis on key parameters and improved feature visualizations, etc. But what I'm really keen about, well, aside from the real-time spectrum signal, which is awesome, these new filter types and some new filter circuits, as well as modulation improvements, and even some signal flow, which includes like a dry wet control, a clip, and output level as well. Let's take a look at some of the new features in auto filter. I'm super stoked for this. Okay, so I've got a drum break here loaded up on this MIDI track. Let's grab the new auto filter device. By the way, if you want to download the beta version, you need to sign up to the public beta. I think you can do that if you own a license of Live Suite, and there's a whole process to go through and set to code and do that. But let's take a look at the auto filter device. By default, obviously you can see it looks super different to what auto filter used to look like. I'll pop an image up on screen to show you what it used to look like, but now it looks very, very different. We have this big frequency control here over on the left. We've got some filter types here, which we can see there's a bunch more filters. We've got DJ, comb, resampling, notch, and LP, and a vowel filter. And then a kind of reworked modulation thing down the bottom, as well as some output kind of controls here on the right, which is super cool. So here in the DJ filter, it looks like we've got this main control, which is just like a high and low pass filter, which is quite cool. And I guess at 0%, it's effectively bypassed. Cool, and I guess the resonance control will, so as we kind of increase or decrease the filter, the resonance also changes here to kind of adjust for that, which is super nice. And you can see here, I guess we've only just on a single SVF circuit, which is our main circuit now. We don't kind of have like a clean circuit anymore, with just this main SVF, which has a drive parameter still, which is really cool, and a clip on the output as well. And then a dry wet control, which is, of course is wicked as well. Which is not super useful on, I guess, a DJ filter. But if we take a look at something like the vowel filter, which is a formant filter, it's gonna be much more useful on this. So if we go to 100% dry wet, oh, that's pretty cool. Let's chuck this on like a sawtooth wave. So I've just pulled in a drift with a sawtooth wave. I've got the auto filter here on the formant filter, and let's have a listen. If you want those kind of yoy basses, they're really easy now. Which is super sick. And I think this is probably also a good chance to take a look at the modulation here down the bottom, which aside from obviously this visually redesigned UI here with the spectrogram, we have these modulations down the bottom, which I think work fairly similarly to how they used to, but we have now this visualization here of what the LFO is actually doing, or the envelope even as well. So let's see what Ableton has to say about the new filter types. There's the DJ filter, which controls both a low and high pass filter with a single parameter. There's a comb filter, vowel filter, new morph filter with 4 different slopes, and then a resampling filter and a notch plus low pass filter. The resampling filter being like a kind of downsampling filter, probably more obvious on like the drum break. And then the notch and low pass, which is just a combination of a notch and a low pass, which is quite cool. Particularly if you want to add like an LFO to this morph or something, that could be quite cool. Nice. So some new filter circuits too. The SVF is now like a linear and clean filter, but introduces distortion if drive is above 0, as we heard. Then a few new ones, a DFM with a filter circuit that internally feeds back more of its distortion, which we can get some really gnarly tones from that, I imagine. MS2, same kind of thing, and PRD, which is the latter one. I think these two have kind of been around previously, but as you would note, they're not available in every single different filter type, of course. And so we've got some modulation improvements here too. So the LFO shapes has been extended. We now have a wander, ramp up, and ramp down. The LFO morph parameter transforms and tilts the LFO shapes in various ways. So we can see here that underneath the LFO wave shape control, we actually have this morph. I'd kind of like to see this morph actually show us the morphing of the wave so that we know exactly how it's morphing the wave shape. Because it's a little bit hard to kind of figure out exactly the shape of the LFO at the moment with this morph control, but I think that's pretty cool. We now have a sample and hold shape, which has a dedicated smoothing parameter, and then we have LFO quantization in 2 different modes now, which is pretty cool. If you weren't aware, there was like a quantize mode in the old auto filter, and now we have a steps mode and a sample and hold mode for quantization. So the steps mode only updates at specific intervals, which are defined by the current LFO speed divided by the selected number of steps. So we could go like sync this to 2 bars and now select the steps and now divide this into like 10 different steps for the syncing of this LFO. Or we could go to like half a bar and we have 11 steps. And then of course we have the sample and hold one as well, which is just that it quantizes the movement of the LFO to a synced kind of division here, which is also really nice. So then we have some extra stuff here in the envelope follower mode. We have an attack hold parameter, which is pretty cool, a sidechain signal, which can be summed to mono via the mono sidechain input, and an EQ to the sidechain input section. So you can see if we click on the envelope icon here, we've got some changes. This attack is now here. We've got this hold section, release, and then again, we can turn on or off the sample and hold for the envelope as well, which is quite cool. So we can have that separately from the LFO. And then we can also see the mono sidechain here. If we right click on the device title bar, and we have the kind of redesigned sidechain input here, as well as a sidechain filter to trigger the envelope follower here with an external sidechain input that's being filtered, which is super cool. I like this new redesigned sidechain as well. It's a lot more obvious that there's kind of sidechain capabilities in this effect. Lastly, of course, we have a dedicated output control, clip toggle, and a dry wet control, which as we saw was super useful there for getting some really gnarly sounds. And of course, don't forget auto filter is available in all editions of Ableton Live. So we now have a bunch more different types of really creative filters and effects and like saturation directly in this filter just by default with an output clip and a dry wet. Gnarly, really awesome stuff here on this new auto filter. +1 Ableton, this is great. Up next, we can see we have an automation and modulation keyboard workflow, which looks like it's returned from the initial public beta of Live 12.1. Of course, bear in mind, all of this is subject to change. This is a beta, so this could make it into the official release of 12.2 or not. Only time will tell on that one. But this was supposed to initially be in on 12.1, but it looks like they've edited it a little bit in terms of how it works. So we can select current breakpoints with enter and move breakpoints, jump to next and previous breakpoints, select existing breakpoints, etc. And this is obviously, of course, all in the arrangement view and modulation view inside of a clip view as well. So let's take a look at this and potentially like just go into the arrangement view here, press A, and let's just look at kind of modulating this auto filter frequency. I guess if I put my insert marker here and just press enter, sick, we can add like a breakpoint. I guess if I press enter again, that'll deselect the breakpoint, and now I can press enter and add a new breakpoint somewhere else. Cool, and so I can just do this, which is nice. And then how would I move this breakpoint? I guess I can just type in a value like enter 140 or something, and that will do that, which is great. And now I can just move across and add a breakpoint kind of anywhere I want. Go like 150, that's awesome. This is a really cool little workflow, actually. I quite like this. And then I like this little addition here at the end as well, which is that we can cycle through automated parameters of all devices on a track with some keyboard shortcuts. That's a pretty cool, but I guess if we had like some automation on the filter resonance or something as well, and the filter morph, etc., Then we could cycle through these with, I guess, the Option and up or down keys, which is really, really nice. So we could hold Shift and Alt to cycle through ones that even aren't automated there. So just some really nice accessibility features for some keyboard workflow for automation and modulation. Always a nice addition. I hope it stays this time. I know a few people were really excited about this. So fingers crossed it actually sticks for the full official release of 12.2. Now next is something that I'm super stoked about. I know a lot of people are going to be super stoked about it. This is bounce tracks to audio. 2 new commands for bouncing tracks have been added. Bounce track in place and bounce to new track. You can use bounce track in place to render entire tracks as new audio tracks, and bounce to new track to render the time selection of a track into a new audio clip on a separate track. Bouncing is performed pre-mixer and post-effects. This means the source track's effects processing is included in the rendered audio. So finally, a proper bounce in place for Ableton Live. This is so awesome. And there's even a keyboard shortcut for it, which is super awesome. All right, so here I've just put together a little kind of progression in drift, which sounds like this. And so we can bounce the track just as is, basically replacing the old freeze and flatten command by just right-clicking and going to now what is bounce track in place. And that will just freeze and flatten the track like it used to, except we can now also select a time range, say like this 3rd bar here, and then right-click and either go to bounce to new track or use the keyboard command, which on Mac is Option Shift Command J. A little bit of an awkward one, but we now have a new audio track created with the bounced little bit of audio there from the initial track, and we have a muted clip there, which is really cool because now we could like reverse this and maybe fade it or something like that. And we've muted the initial kind of clip there, which is really fantastic that it does that by default. We have a new audio track. We've got the bounce there. I am so happy for this to finally be implemented in a really smooth and quick way. Now, I guess it is worth noting that I just give it a try and this does not work on groups. So there's still a little bit of a way to go there, but the fact that you can just do this on individual tracks is still really amazing. Still a +1 in my books for Ableton here. So up next, we've got a whole bunch of browser improvements. We can see the browser even just in here looks quite redesigned. The first thing is that we have a redesigned filter view to better accommodate recently added filtering and tagging features. So we have the filters title bar, which has been removed. It used to be like a thing that said filters, and now it's just a little toggle in the top right of the search bar, which I really like. And we've added a filter view menu drop down to the show hide filter toggle. So there's a few different options there right next to that filter toggle, and the browse back and forward options have been slightly updated. So we can see if we go back to Ableton Live, we now have this option here, which shows or hides the filters as opposed to a little title bar here, which just said filters. It's nice, it just gives us a bit more space. And then we have this little drop down here, which shows us all of the different things we can open up, like the tag editor, which used to be a little edit button, but now it's this little drop down here. And we have some open quick tags and enabling auto tags here as well. So the auto tags now shows up under here, and we have this quick tags option, which shows up right down the bottom, which is something that I'll show in a second. So we also have some more display options for the content columns, which is quite cool. Previously, you could kind of only have one column show up in the browser additionally, but it looks like we can now have different or kind of more than one column show up in the browser. So you can see here my all is sorted by type. I could add a size and I could reorder this to have size here. I could have like a rank as well as type, and I could kind of reorder these, which is really cool. I could hide all the extra columns. I could, add them here as well. And I also get the ability to, under this little option, show or hide file extensions, which is quite cool. I guess if I scroll down, we've got like a bunch of WAV files here. I can show or hide them, which is just a nice addition to have here. And then we have this quick tags panel, which basically allows us to see really quickly what each different browser item is tagged as without having to go into the tag editor. You can see we can see user created tags with multiple items selected. Any tags which are not assigned to all the selected items are displayed with an asterisk. We can double click a tag in the quick tag panel to open the corresponding tag in the tag editor, so many tags. And we can also use the keyboard shortcut when the browser is in focus to go directly to the add field of a quick tags panel. So if I wanted to tag something, say the auto filter device here, we can click on this, we can see we've got these quick tags down the bottom. I can select multiple things and you can see that none of these things share any tags, so they've got all asterisks here. If I wanted to add a manual tag to this, I could press Command or Control and E, come down to here, and I guess I could like add a tag that I wanted to. So I could add like filter EQ or something like that. And we can see that's now like a user assigned tag that I can delete there. I don't think we can add new tags from here. So if I wanted to add like this to fun or something, I don't think we can add a new tag here. I still think we have to do that in the tag editor, but we can open the tag editor really quickly by double clicking on any of these quick tags. So just kind of improving the filter and tagging workflow a little bit here, which I think is super nice, super useful. Now for a really kind of cool and fun one, you can now add custom icons to any of the things or the labels in the library in the browser. Let's take a quick look. So if I wanted to go to like my, templates, I could change the templates icon to any of these different icons here. I could potentially also do this for any of my like saved searches as well. So I've got this Arturia Synths saved search here. I can right click and maybe make this like a keyboard icon, which is quite cool. And I can also do this for any of my additionally added folders. So if I've got some samples here under like random sound design, I could, make this like a random one, like this folder with some audio waveform on it. And it just kind of differentiates it. It's a little bit of fun, totally unnecessary, but it's nice to be able to now customize our browser just a little bit more than kind of what was previously able to be done. And there's also some kind of improvements here to the browser in general, search bar improvements, results bar improvements, and some new filters, basic additions to the filtering system, which is welcomed in a system that is still kind of figuring out the kinks. All right, so up next we have some more device improvements. Starting with Meld, we have a new chord oscillator type, which when the use current scale toggle is enabled in the device title bar, generated chords use the notes of the set scale. If no scale is set, a major scale is used with the incoming MIDI note as the root. And there's a new scrambler LFO effects one. I'm gonna be honest, I haven't used Meld's LFO section much, so this doesn't super interest me, but the chord oscillator does interest me. Let's take a quick look at that. All right, so here I've got Meld. Let's turn off oscillator B and select the chord from the oscillator menu. Play a little bit higher octave here. So we have just a major scale, or a major chord rather, which is quite cool. We can set the chord shape and an inversion, I guess. And then I guess if we now go use current scale, we have some options here to lock this to the current scale, which is currently set to D Lydian. So this is kind of nice, just having like a really basic chord oscillator. Turn up some spread, maybe stack it 2 times. Nice, just a little bit of fun. And I guess if we go to the LFO section, we now have this scrambler, which allows us to scramble the LFO in a weird kind of way, which is kind of cool. Now next, I'm really excited about this one. We have some updates to RAW. We have a new delay routing mode, which in this mode, the second stage processes the delayed signal from stage 1, but unlike in the feedback routing mode, the delayed signal is sent to the second stage without being scaled by the feedback again. This creates single distorted repetitions or slapbacks. The output of stage 2 is fed back into itself and scaled with the feedback gain, enabling multiple repetitions of long signal tails. The blend control can be used to mix between the output of stage 1 and stage 2. So we basically have like now a proper delay inside of RAW as opposed to kind of being fed back through all of the kind of, distorted aspects of the signal. So here I've pulled on a RAW onto this drum break track. Let's go ahead and switch the routing here to delay. So now I guess if we go to the feedback mode, we could change this to like synced at, 1/8 notes or something like that, and then increase the amount here. So we now have kind of a basic delay, and we could increase this distortion amount, maybe set it to like a different distortion type here. As opposed to the feedback, where the distorted signal is fed back into the distorted signal, so we get this kind of really increasing distorted signal effect. So it's nice to just have this kind of different delay option here in RAW, but there are a bunch more new RAW things as well. Second, we have a new dispersion filter type. So for those of you who are familiar with like kilohertz disperser, we now have a dispersion filter in RAW, which is pretty cool. So now back in RAW, let's just set this to the single stage here and set the filter type to dispersion. Let's turn off the shaper and have a listen to what it sounds like when we just play around with this frequency control. Kind of like this liquidy, metallic-y, bouncy, zappy sound because of the adjustment of the phase of the different frequencies. And we can drive it into it, of course. And I guess we could also then like add an envelope follower to this particular frequency control here. So we get this weird kind of zappy effect, which is quite cool. We also have an external sidechain now added to RAW, both for being able to feed the envelope follower as a modulation source and also a MIDI sidechain input that we can use to control the pitch of the feedback when it's in note mode. Both of these things have been asked for, both of them have been implemented. This is really sick. So here I've just pulled in that kind of reverse drift sound that we had, and I've got RAW on here. We can open up the external sidechain, turn it on, set the source to say that drum break, maybe set this to the single mode here. And then we could have like the drum break actually affect the envelope follower on say the filter for this. So I could click on the filter frequency and maybe go envelope, matrix, and have envelope affect the filter frequency here. So now the filter frequency is going to jump up and down in correspondence with the drum break on our drum break track. So that's pretty cool there. But then we also have the ability to affect the feedback mode of RAW with an incoming MIDI note. So let's create a new MIDI track, and back on the drum break, I'm actually gonna set the drum break FB mode to note, open up the sidechain option and click on MIDI feedback note with the MIDI feedback from track number 6 here. Arm this track on MIDI track number 6. So let's just solo the drum break and increase the amount of feedback here. Let's just turn off the filter here. And we can hear that feedback note there. And now if I play some different notes on my MIDI keyboard, really cool, we can now impart or change this kind of feedback note here just by feeding it an external MIDI signal. That's really, really, really useful. There's also some other changes with like an envelope hold toggle and modulation signal, but I want to get into some other of my favorite things, which is some additions to some other audio effects, which include the Resonator and Spectral Resonator effects. So up first, we have Resonator, which now supports scale awareness. So here I've got Resonator loaded up on this same drum break. Now, initially we'd have to kind of set the root note of Resonator here with this note control and, wouldn't be super useful. But now we have the ability to actually have each of these different notes and pitches controlled by or kind of set in scale degrees so we can lock the resonating to our scale of the set clip. So I can click on this use current scale option. The scale for our drum break clip is currently set to D Lydian again. So by default, we're gonna kind of resonate on a D here with this initial note. And now I can basically create chords really, really quickly on this drum break track. And then of course, if I change the scale to something like F Lydian, we're gonna change the pitches that are resonated. Now, unfortunately, there's still no MIDI input for Resonator, but being able to have it linked to the scale is a really good start for this, which means we can automate it and not have to worry about kind of skipping between notes that aren't on the scale, etc. So it's still a really cool addition to Resonators. Now, Ableton Live's other Resonator device, Spectral Resonator, also now supports scale awareness, which is really, really cool. So let's take a look at that. So here I've put Spectral Resonator on this drum break. By default, I would change the frequency control here. And that would change the resonating of the Spectral Resonator, but now I can have this actually set to use the current scale mode, and now we shift this in scale degrees, which is super cool. But why this is really awesome as well is because Spectral Resonator does have a MIDI input mode. So if I now set Spectral Resonator to receive its MIDI input from track number 6 here, we can send Spectral Resonator some MIDI information and change the note resonance being set by Spectral Resonator with the MIDI information. And shift that incoming MIDI by a certain number of scale degrees, which is really cool. We can have it polyphonic as well, just as we used to always be able to do. Now, something that is just talked about really, really briefly in the Spectral Resonator update is this, which is that we can also quantize the resonator's harmonics to the scale by enabling the quantize option above the spectrogram. This is really cool. And if you've ever used anything like pitch map, basically what we're doing here is polyphonically tuning and snapping all of the harmonics in the Spectral Resonator to the scale set by the device. So let's set this back to internal mode. And now instead of just resonating a specific note, I'm going to click on this Quantize button and take a listen to what happens. All of the individual harmonics that are being generated by this Spectral Resonator are now being snapped to the key of D Phrygian, of the scale that's set by the clip scale of this drum break clip here. I could shift these all down in terms of 12 semitones or something. Or I could even click on this MIDI option right here, send, say, a chord into these drums. And we can basically quantize or tune the individual frequencies of this sound to a set pitch. If you're into genres like color bass or whatever, this is now basically all you need for that. Now there's still a few more things to get through, so I'm just gonna rip through them. We have now Operator supporting a maximum voice count of 32 voices, which is awesome. And we also have some device header improvements, which we can see here. Instead of there being this little kind of triangle that used to be there to expand a view as with what like Wavetable and Raw, we now have a little kind of updated graphic here with a line and an arrow just to make it a little bit more obvious that there's an expanded view. For instance, if I look at Raw, we can see it's now this kind of little expanded view icon here with an arrow up and an arrow down. Same thing with Wavetable. The expanded view is now this little arrow icon instead of what was this kind of triangle icon, which is potentially a little bit confusing to new people. The sidechain toggle position has been updated in all the devices. We've seen this now in the auto filter and the Raw device, but this is also carried over to the compressor, corpus, gate, glue compressor, multiband dynamics, and shifter devices. And additionally, the sidechain filter in the compressor is now accessible in its own panel, which is pretty cool instead of being accessible just purely in that sidechain panel. And we now have the context menu options available for all devices with a dedicated button instead of just with a right-click option. So we can see here, if I go to Wavetable, which is open up all the way over on the right-hand side, we now have this tiny little 3-dot button, which allows us to open up the context menu, which is really nice to have this there as opposed to just having to right-click on the title bar. It just shows that there's actually something there instead of, you know, having to try and right-click on something to figure that out. There's some additional device improvements with the sample start and end markers now preserved when converting Simpletus Drum Sampler. Fantastic. There's now an option in Drum Sampler to scale the envelopes with MIDI notes. That's kind of cool. We can have a pitch to envelope. Drum Sampler, the whole parameter in trigger mode now uses infinity as the maximum value. We can now have a high quality mode in Drift, which is super nice. And there's some updates to the core library, of course, featuring some of the new presets for auto filter, etc. There are some updates to Max for Live here as well. None of this means anything to me because I don't really, do a lot of Max for Live development. But if you are a Max for Live developer, I'm sure this is going to be really nice and useful for you. And then there are some arrangement view improvements. Track headers now display a show hide take lanes button when more than one take lane has been recorded on a given track or after choosing insert take lane from a track's context menu. Thank goodness. If you don't know what this means, basically, it used to be that if there were take lanes on a track, you'd have no idea that there was any take lanes on the track unless you right-clicked on that track and went to show the take lanes, and then maybe there'd be some take lanes, right? But now, if I insert a take lane or two, we have this little button here which allows us to quickly see, for one, that there are actually take lanes on the track, but also two, show or hide all the take lanes really easily. This is such a game changer for workflow improvements, particularly because the take lane keyboard shortcuts were a little bit awkward to remember. Now there's also some options here to delete all take lanes or delete unused take lanes in a single click, which is really fantastic. So I could delete these unused take lanes simply just by right-clicking on the take lane and clicking delete unused, or delete all take lanes. Those are some really welcome new shortcuts. Now I'm reading here that group tracks with many nested tracks now also take up less space in the arrangement view, and that the overview shown for group tracks is no longer fixed in size, but now zooms depending on the group track's size. I know that this is gonna be really good for a lot of people, so I haven't actually tested this yet. Let's go ahead and just add a bunch of audio tracks to this group here. And normally, if I had this many tracks, the group track would be really kind of fixed in height and size. So if I now fold this group track, that is really cool. We can now have this be basically any size that we want, which is really nice. I know that a lot of people are gonna like that. The fact that we can basically have this group that has a lot of different tracks in it just be the size of a single track instead of being, kind of this larger size here like it used to be. That's a really nice improvement for kind of space efficiency and real estate in Ableton Live. Now there are some session view improvements, which is that scene follow actions can now be toggled between unlinked and longest, which is when set to longest, the follow action is triggered at the end of the longest clip in the scene, or after that clip has played the number of loops defined by the follow action multiplier. When set to unlinked, the follow action is triggered after the scene has played for the duration specified by the follow action time. And this is for updates to Ableton Push 3, which I don't know if I'll go through in this video, but there are some follow action updates to the Push 3, and this makes that actually really worthwhile to be used. There's some control surface improvements, so if you're using some specific control surfaces, you might have some improvements there, and there are some additional improvements here, none of which are super kind of revolutionary. There's just a few kind of less memory and more efficiency type things, and some updated software text and what's new sections as well. So that's really nice. Now there are also a whole bunch of bug fixes. So I'm not going to go through all of these because I don't experience a huge number of bugs, but if you've been experiencing some bugs in your current version of Ableton Live, come here and have a scroll through these bug fixes to see if the bugs that you've been experiencing are fixed in 12.2, at least in this initial release of the public beta of 12.2. Now that's it for the release notes for Live 12.2. If you do want to check out these release notes yourself, I'll leave a link in the description, but there is one more thing that I want to go through really quickly, which is a new Max for Live device that's also coming in Live 12.2 called Expressive Chords, which looks really cool and interesting. So here on this Drift track, I've loaded up the Expressive Chords Max for Live MIDI device, and if you want to be able to get this, you need to actually go and download it from the public beta page. You need to be signed up to the public beta. This is a separate download. It's not included with the download of 12.2. But basically, it's just a set of chords that we can play here with these pads. It's got some really nice push 3 integration, which is quite cool. But if I just send it some notes, every note now has a corresponding chord assigned to it, and we have some modulation capabilities here as well. But what's cool about this is that these chords are actually derived from a chord set, which we can import from a clip. And if we go to the browser and have a look at the Expressive Chords pack, we can see we've got this MIDI chord sets here. And if I just kind of click and drag this ALC file onto this track and have this selected, I can come down to the Expressive Chords device and click on import, and that will import the chord set from the currently selected clip. And we can see if we open up this chord or this clip, it's just a bunch of different chords here, just all like 1 beat long. And now we've imported all those chords into Expressive Chords, and I can play these chords instead of what was there as the default set. I could get a different set of chords, maybe this Detroit strings, select that, import those chords. And then we have some bottom options like tilt, invert, and strum. The invert kind of, I think, inverts the chords. And the strum affects the timing of the different notes. And then we have different articulations of the strum here. And I guess we can switch the direction of the articulation. And we can edit the different articulations as well in the articulation editor, which is quite cool. And then we have a tilt parameter, which I'm not entirely sure what it does, but my guess is that it allows us to work with this modulation section with just kind of like a modulation control here. We've got two different views. We've got like a MIDI keyboard view and the pad view. And this is just a really nice device. And if we take a look at this little option right here, we can see exactly how it integrates with the Push 3, that we have a bunch of different pads, articulation options up the top. And this is a really nice little device that isn't covered in the release notes, but is an addition to Live 12.2, much like the sequences were an addition in Live 12.1. Now, as I mentioned, there are also some updates to Push 3 with the release of this beta. I'm not going to go through them in detail, but we do have additions to follow actions, which allow us to actually structure a live set. It's not quite an arrangement mode, but it's kind of getting closer to that. We have the 16 pitches mode that comes over from Ableton Move into the Ableton Push 3. We have the bounce tracks to audio here as an available thing in the Push 3 as well now. And then we also have access to the groove pool directly from Push 3 2, which wasn't accessible in its entirety previously. There's also the ability now to load tuning systems. And oh, here we go. We have the Expressive Chords device actually covered here in the updates for Push 3 as well. And then there's some basic device updates and some additional improvements here. If you use a Push 3, I highly recommend checking out these release notes as well. And you can find them linked in the main release notes page that I'll leave in the description below. Oh my God, those are some massive updates here in Ableton Live 12.2. Let me know which are your favorite updates by commenting down below. If you do get a chance to play around with the public beta, I highly recommend it. I know I'm gonna be playing around with it and maybe doing some more in-depth videos on some of these different devices as I get the chance to have a play around with them. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something. Stay awesome. Have fun playing around with the new beta, and I'll see you all in the next video.